Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because, well, you want to cut through the noise, right? Understand what's really happening, globally and at home, without getting lost in endless news cycles.
Exactly. And that's what we do. We take a whole stack of information, recent reports, and really distill it down.
We pull out the crucial insights for you. Today, we've got a really compelling set of stories. Each one gives you a unique angle on the forces shaping our world, like right now.
Absolutely. Think of it as your curated briefing.
Mhm.
We've synthesized a pretty comprehensive analysis to bring you the essential nuggets, the key takeaways from a whole range of events.
Okay, let's dive straight in. First up, the Middle East. Always complex. We're looking at the Trump administration's diplomacy there, especially concerning Iran. The president was just in Saudi Arabia.
Right, with a very direct message for Tehran about its nuclear program.
What was the core of that message?
What's interesting, it's kind of a two-sided coin. On one hand, President Trump talked about a potential new and a better path for Iran, hinting at maybe negotiating an updated nuclear deal.
Okay, an opening.
But at the same time, he laid down a serious threat, massive, maximum pressure, including maybe halting their oil exports entirely if diplomacy doesn't work out. It's that classic coercive diplomacy approach, offer and threat together.
And it wasn't just about Iran, was it? Strengthening alliances, more deal-making, that was also part of the discussion.
Definitely. A big piece was the possibility of Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. That was, and maybe still is, a major goal.
But how does that fit with, everything that happened on October 7th and the Saudis' traditional position?
That's the complication, a huge one. Saudi Arabia has historically linked normalizing relations with Israel to progress on a Palestinian state based on the 67 borders. Yeah, October 7th makes that incredibly difficult right now, a major hurdle.
Now, here's something really interesting from the briefing, a shift regarding Syria. Sanctions lifted, a planned meeting with the new Syrian president, Ahmad al-Shara. What's the thinking there?
If you look at it through the lens of countering Iran, it starts to make a certain kind of sense, at least from the perspective of some Gulf states.
How so?
They see this new Syrian leadership, maybe, as a potential counterweight to Tehran's influence in Syria. So by engaging al-Shara, easing sanctions, the administration might be trying to, shift the alignment a bit, dilute Iran's grip.
So the bigger picture seems to be doubling down on the Gulf Arab states as partners to push back against Iran?
Exactly. The briefing really stresses this two-pronged strategy. You've got active diplomacy. Steve Witkoff is the special envoy for talks.
Right.
But then you also have the very real threat of severe sanctions if those talks don't go anywhere. It's a real balancing act, high stakes.
And all this is happening against the backdrop of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, plus now this new Syrian dynamic. It definitely impacts regional stability, U.S. interests, counterterrorism, Iranian expansion, all of that.
For sure. The briefing concludes the administration is trying to navigate this by balancing that active engagement with a very clear posture of deterrence. It's incredibly complex, lots of moving parts, competing interests.
Okay, let's pivot. From the Middle East to Europe, specifically Greece. The U.S. military seems to have gained expanded access to a key port there.
That's right. We're talking about the commercial port of Kavala up in northern Greece on the Aegean Sea.
And this is new access.
Well, the use is new in this way. U.S. Army units used it for the first time during the Defender 25 exercise to offload vehicle convoys. Brigadier General Karen Monday Gresham said it gives them, quote, increased options for future missions and boosts power projection on NATO's southern flank. So, yeah, more flexibility.
And it's not just for exercises. Greek authorities are planning upgrades, like a rail terminal. That sounds pretty strategic long-term.
It does. And looking bigger picture, this fits into UZCOM's push U.S.-European Command to diversify logistics in southern Europe.
Right, not just relying on northern ports like Bremerhaven.
Exactly. That's been a priority since Russia's 2014 actions in Ukraine. Build more resilience in the south. And Greece is becoming a really critical node, partly thanks to recent security cooperation agreements.
So how did this work logistically at Kavala? Military using a commercial port.
Close collaboration.
Yeah.
U.S. Army, U.S. Coast Guard, Greek military civilian port authorities, they all work together. They even made some infrastructure changes, like putting up barrier walls to create a dedicated military area right alongside the normal commercial traffic.
Interesting. Okay, shifting focus again now to the Pacific, the Philippines. A big U.S. Army exercise is planned there this summer.
Yes, a pretty substantial one. The Hawaii-based 25th Infantry Division is heading there to work with the Philippine Army's 5th and 7th Divisions.
What kind of drill is it?
It's described as a defensive drill, but it involves a major logistical piece moving forces and equipment 250 miles across Luzon. Air, sea, land routes. They're even using Army watercraft on Luzon's east coast. So complex movement.
It sounds like it. Is this part of something bigger, like building on previous exercises?
It seems so. The briefing calls it an expansion of U.S. Army Pacific's mobile JPMRC, that's Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center. It's the second year they're doing this large-scale training in the Philippines, building on the recent Balikatan exercise. Shows a growing commitment to joint training there.
And they're testing new tech, too, something called Transforming in Contact.
Yeah, that's the Army's initiative for figuring out how to quickly integrate new technologies into units while they're basically, in simulated contact, making units more lethal, survivable, adaptable.
So what are they testing specifically in this exercise?
A couple of key things. The new infantry squad vehicle, the ISV, and a big expansion in the use of small drones, like potentially over 200 of them.
Wow, 200 drones, that's a lot, and some are 3D printed.
That's right. Some drones made using 3D printing by the 2nd Light Brigade Combat Team. And crucially, they'll have a much longer range, nearly 20 miles at the brigade level.
That's way up from previous exercises, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Previous range was around 3 miles. So this is a huge jump in battlefield awareness and reach. They're also testing troop sustainment innovations like independent water production and purification systems, things they've been working on for the past 6 weeks or so.
Okay, staying in the Pacific, Taiwan. A big development there, their first live-fire test of the U.S.-supplied HIMARS rocket system.
Precisely. A significant step. They launched 33 rockets from 11 launchers during this first test.
Where did this happen?
At the Jeping base in southern Taiwan, firing out into the Pacific Ocean. It's a major move to bolster their defensive capabilities, no question. A clear signal.
We just talked about exercises in the Philippines. The briefing notes the U.S. Army uses HIMARS in coastal defense drills there, too. Does this hint at using HIMARS against ships, maybe?
It certainly highlights the system's versatility. Yeah. While it's mainly for land targets, its precision and range mean it could contribute to coastal defense, potentially even engaging naval targets in certain situations. Adds another layer to its strategic value.
Of course, this is happening while China is ramping up military pressure. How is Beijing likely to see this HIMARS test?
Well, you have to assume they see it as provocative. Taiwan successfully demonstrating a sophisticated long-range precision strike system. Beijing probably views that as a significant enhancement of Taiwan's ability to deter them. It wouldn't be surprising to see some kind of response. More drills, more posturing near Taiwan.
Can you give us a few more details on the HIMARS system itself? Lockheed Martin makes it...
Correct. It's highly mobile, quick to deploy. It can carry a 6-pack of guided rockets or 2 of the newer precision strike missiles, PRSMs, which have longer range, or 1 ATACMS missile, which is even larger.
And the range.
Proven range is up to 186 miles with current munitions, but stuff in development aims to push that past 310 miles. Taiwan's bought 29 units total, 11 delivered this year, 18 more coming, expedited, in 2026. It's a serious investment.
And the U.S. providing these is consistent with?
The Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, providing defensive weapons, supporting Taiwan's ability to resist coercion, even without formal diplomatic recognition, underscores the U.S. commitment to Taiwan's self-defense.
Okay, let's shift focus now to South Korea. A security incident reported at Osan Air Base during an open house event.
Yes, 2 Taiwanese men were arrested, allegedly for unauthorized entry and filming during the Air Power Days event.
When did this happen?
They attended and allegedly filmed on Saturday and were arrested on Sunday. Pyeongtaek police have them in emergency detention while they review the case.
You'd think security would be tight at these things. What are the usual rules?
Generally, everyone needs government ID.
Yeah.
And for foreign nationals not with the U.S. military, there are usually extra requirements. Osan is especially sensitive. It's home to the U.S. 7th Air Force and South Korea's Air Force Operations Command. So security is, paramount.
Has this kind of thing happened before around there?
The briefing mentions other recent incidents. Chinese nationals detained near Osan and also Suwon Air Base, allegedly for filming military aircraft. So it points to an ongoing concern about potential surveillance or intelligence gathering targeting U.S. assets in South Korea.
What kind of legal trouble could these individuals be in?
Under South Korean law, unauthorized filming of military sites is serious. It could mean hefty fines up to maybe $20,400 or even prison time up to 3 years. And the emergency detention lets them hold someone for up to 48 hours without a warrant if they think they might flee or destroy evidence.
All right, turning now to a different kind of issue. Boeing and the new Air Force One planes sounds like major delays.
Oh, yeah. Significant delays and pretty substantial financial hits for Boeing. The two new planes were supposed to be delivered this year, 2024. That was under a $3.9 billion fixed-price contract from back in July 2018.
And Boeing's lost money on this.
A lot. They've reported losses of $2.5 billion just on this project because of that fixed-price deal.
Why the delays? What reasons are they giving?
It sounds like a perfect storm, really. A key supplier went bankrupt. Security clearance processes took longer than expected. High employee turnover at the modification facility down in San Antonio. And, of course, pandemic supply chain issues. All contributed.
So when are they expected now? The delivery date keeps moving.
The latest target is 2027, which is actually better than a recent White House estimate that put it out to 2029. But still, years late. And these delays and cost issues drew criticism from former President Trump.
And there's this really unusual idea floating around accepting a gifted 747 from Qatar as a temporary Air Force One.
Right. That's being considered as a potential stopgap. It's reportedly a 13-year-old Boeing 747 from the Qatari royal family.
But you couldn't just use it as is, surely.
Oh, absolutely not. It would need massive militarization and security upgrades to meet Air Force One standards, which cost time and money. There's even talk of transferring this gifted plane to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation later on, maybe towards the end of his second term, if it's accepted.
And the current planes are getting old.
Pretty old, yeah. Around 35 years. So the need for replacement is definitely there. And remember, these aren't just standard planes. The Boeing contract specifies unique features: anti-missile defense, protection from hacking, nuclear blast protection, advanced communications. Very complex modifications.
Okay, let's turn to domestic policy. House Republicans have unveiled a major tax bill, quite the title, the One Big Beautiful Bill, and a big price tag, too.
Indeed. Projected cost is at least $4.9 trillion, so a massive piece of legislation.
What are the main things in it?
Key provisions include making the Trump-era tax cuts permanent, also expanding the standard deduction, the child tax credit, and the estate tax exemption. Plus, there are new proposed tax breaks for tipped wages, overtime pay, Social Security benefits, even auto loan interest.
What about the SALT deduction, the state and local tax cap? Always contentious.
They propose tripling the cap for married couples, up to $30,000. But the briefing notes, even that's not enough for some Republicans from high-tax states. They still see it as insufficient.
With a $4.9 trillion cost for the tax cuts, how are they proposing to pay for it, or at least partially pay for it?
Right, they're not proposing adding it all to the deficit. The plan includes spending reductions in areas like Medicaid, food stamps, and green energy initiatives.
Any other funding sources?
Yes, a couple of others. A new tax, up to 21%, on large private university endowments. And a pretty controversial provision to revoke the tax-exempt status of organizations the State Department alleges support terrorists.
And separate from this main bill, the House Agriculture Committee is looking at cuts to nutrition programs.
That's right. They propose cutting about $290 billion from federal nutrition programs. Part of that involves increasing work requirements for SNAP recipients, specifically able-bodied adults without dependents, and raising the age limit for those requirements from 54 up to 64.
This definitely sounds like it's setting the stage for a huge political fight over spending, taxes, and national priorities.
Absolutely. Expect major debates over the economic impact, the deficit implications, and just the basic fairness of who benefits and who pays under these proposals.
Okay, our next story involves a budget airline, Avelo, getting into a new line of business. Flying deportation flights for ICE.
Yes. Avelo Airlines, they launched back in 2021 a U.S.-based budget carrier. They've started operating these federal deportation flights for immigration and customs enforcement.
Where are they flying from?
They're using 3 Boeing 737-800s originating out of Mesa Gateway Airport near Phoenix, Arizona.
And this fits with the administration's goal of increasing deportations.
It seems to align, yes. The briefing mentions ongoing congressional talks about funding to remove about 1 million people annually, plus expanding ICE detention capacity and hiring maybe 10,000 more officers. Mesa is apparently one of 5 designated hubs for these ICE operations.
Avelo's model is usually about low costs, older planes, secondary airports. What's the reported rationale for taking on this ICE contract?
According to their CEO, Andrew Levy, the ICE contract helps support the airline's expansion and keeps jobs going. Avelo was actually acting as a subcarrier for another company, CSI Aviation. The specific financial details aren't public.
Has this move faced any backlash?
It has. The flight attendants union at Avelo raised safety concerns, specifically about evacuating deportees who might be shackled in an emergency. There's also an online petition calling for a boycott, and some local politicians in cities Avelo serves have asked the airline to reconsider.
Now, another significant immigration policy change. DHS is ending temporary protected status, TPS, for Afghans in the U.S.
That's correct. The announcement came from DHS Secretary Kristi L. Noem. TPS for Afghan nationals will end effective July 12th.
What's the reason DHS is giving?
They state there have been notable improvements in security and economic stability in Afghanistan, so the country no longer meets the legal requirements for TPS.
TPS was granted after the U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban takeover, right? And it was already set to expire soon anyway.
Yes, the Biden administration initially granted it. It was previously set to expire on May 20th. Secretary Noem said this decision is about returning TPS to its original temporary intent, basically arguing the situation no longer warrants this temporary protection.
But advocacy groups and human rights organizations are likely pushing back hard on this.
Absolutely. They're strongly criticizing the decision. They argue the reality in Afghanistan under the Taliban is still incredibly dangerous. Human rights abuses, especially against women and minorities, lack of a functioning asylum system, ongoing arbitrary arrests. They say the conditions haven't improved enough.
How many people does this affect?
The briefing estimates over 9,000 Afghan TPS holders now face potential deportation. Critics argue the decision is politically motivated and doesn't reflect the actual dangers on the ground. Sean Van Diver from #AfghaniVac was quoted saying exactly that the decision just doesn't match the reality.
In what seems like a very different move, the White House has welcomed a group of white South Africans as refugees. Tell us about that.
Yes, the Trump administration formally welcomed 59 white South Africans, mostly Afrikaners, as refugees. President Trump cited concerns about discrimination and violence against them, specifically mentioning a genocide that's taking place against white farmers.
Who officially welcomed them?
Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau reportedly handled the official welcome.
This has raised some eyebrows, hasn't it? Especially given the administration's broader stance on refugee resettlement.
It has. Refugee advocacy groups are questioning this, especially since resettlement for many other refugee groups faces major hurdles and extensive vetting. There's also concern about the white genocide narrative itself. It's highly contested, often associated with white nationalist groups. The worry is that the U.S. government giving it credence could impact domestic debates here about immigration and race.
How has the South African government responded?
They've strongly denied the genocide claims, calling them completely false and misinformation. President Ramaphosa apparently told President Trump directly that these narratives are pushed by groups opposing South Africa's post-apartheid transformation. So it definitely has the potential to strain U.S.-South Africa relations.
Okay, back to domestic issues. Pro-Palestinian protests on U.S. college campuses. Are they still ongoing as the school year ends?
Yes, the activism is continuing, though maybe not on the same massive scale as earlier in the spring. We're still seeing demonstrations and arrests at several universities as the academic year wraps up. The environment is described as maybe more fraught, more closely watched by administrators now.
And the Trump administration is involved in overseeing how universities handle this.
Very much so. They're actively investigating numerous colleges, focusing on how they've handled the protests, and particularly allegations of anti-Semitism. There are reports they've used frozen federal grant money as leverage to push universities towards adopting stricter rules on activism.
So universities are cracking down more.
It seems that way. Many have implemented tougher disciplinary measures and enforcement policies, trying to prevent the kind of prolonged encampments we saw earlier.
What are the main demands from the student protesters at this point?
Still largely focused on two things: university divestment from companies linked to Israel or supporting the Israeli military, and amnesty for students and faculty who've been disciplined for their protest involvement.
Any recent specific incidents?
Yeah, there was a library occupation at Columbia resulting in about 80 arrests, and a protest at the University of Washington demanding they cut ties with Boeing led to around 30 arrests.
How is the federal government responding to these specific incidents?
A federal anti-Semitism task force is reportedly reviewing the University of Washington situation, praising the police response there, calling for more policy changes. Officials also praised Columbia's police action and suspensions, and there were reports of steps being taken to deport international students linked to this activism.
Okay, next story involves law enforcement using a drone in a really tense situation involving kids and a gun.
Yes, this was in Bernalillo County, New Mexico. The sheriff's office successfully used a drone to help de-escalate a situation with two young brothers, just 7 and 9 years old, who had a loaded handgun.
Wow. And there's footage.
Yes, they released drone and body cam footage. It shows deputies repeatedly urging the kids to drop the gun. At one point, one of the boys actually raised the gun and pulled the trigger.
Oh my gosh.
Fortunately, the weapon malfunctioned. Didn't fire. Deputies then used a non-lethal round to distract the kids, which gave them the chance to safely secure the gun and the children.
Were there previous issues at this home?
The briefing notes about 50 prior calls to the family's home. It really highlights these complex situations: juvenile issues, mental health, firearm access. Instead of charging the kids, the focus is on providing support services to the family: trauma therapy, medical help, behavioral support, even groceries.
And the sheriff highlighted the drone's role.
Absolutely. Sheriff John Allen said the drone program was critical. It gave them that aerial view, real-time assessment, allowing for a safer tactical response. It really shows how useful these unmanned systems, UAS, are becoming for law enforcement officers' safety, operational effectiveness.
All right, next we have reports about federal agencies slowing down or operations even halting, linked to the Trump administration and this Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
Yes. Widespread reports, actions like withholding approvals for funding or purchases, imposing new bureaucratic reviews. It's causing slowdowns, sometimes grinding things to a halt.
Where are we seeing the biggest impacts? The EPA is mentioned.
Right. Research at 11 EPA labs has reportedly largely stopped. This is research on air and water pollution, forever chemicals, critical stuff. The issue seems to be the Office of Mission Support not approving new lab purchases. EPA says nothing's been denied, but employees say things are just stalled.
And it's hitting basic operations, too. Social Security Administration running out of paper.
Yeah, reportedly a $1 spending limit imposed by DOGE on government credit cards at Social Security means they're short on basic office supplies like paper and pens. Seems small, but it really impacts workflow.
What about the Commerce Department? Contract delays.
Big time. All contracts and grants over $100,000 now apparently need personal review by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Anything under that needs approval from other senior political appointees. This has created huge backlogs, over 3,000 requests waiting for Lutnick, almost 1,000 just for NOAA political appointees. We're talking about $230 million in delayed contracts affecting things like janitorial services, security, IT. Even the Defense Department had initial issues getting materials for ballistics testing.
Some critics, like Professor Donald Moynihan, suggest this might be intentional obstruction, not efficiency.
That's his interpretation, yes. That the scale and nature of these actions look less like efficiency measures and more like a deliberate attempt to impede how government functions.
Okay, let's talk about airports. Newark Liberty facing major disruptions, radar issues, and staffing shortages.
Yeah, EWR has had persistent problems. There was recent near miss with a third major outage, but a software update at the Philadelphia TRACON, that's the radar facility managing Newark's airspace, prevented it during a telecom line failure.
But delays are still bad, even without an outage.
Yes, averaging over an hour and a half recently. The main culprit now is apparently air traffic controller shortages. It got worse after some controllers took trauma leave following a previous outage. So the FAA has kept traffic flow restrictions in place, plus there's runway construction. It's leading to cancellations and long delays.
Has the administration weighed in?
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy criticized the prior administration, saying they didn't properly equip the Philadelphia TRACON after earlier hardware problems. The FAA is planning to meet with airlines soon to talk about possibly extending these traffic limits into the summer, so it doesn't sound like a quick fix is expected.
What's the underlying technical problem with the radar?
It seems to be the reliability of the main telecommunications line feeding that Philadelphia TRACON. It's failed multiple times. The backup system software update worked this last time, but the vulnerability of that primary line is still a major concern for that incredibly busy airspace.
Almost there. Story 15 takes us back overseas. Ukrainian President Zelensky planning to go to Turkey for possible peace talks with Putin.
That's the report. Zelensky intends to travel to Ankara and basically wait for Putin, hoping for direct ceasefire negotiations to end this war, which has dragged on for over 3 years now. He's also meeting with Turkey's President Erdogan.
He seems committed to direct talks.
Very much so. He's quoted emphasizing his commitment to getting a ceasefire through direct negotiation with Putin. He's even open to Istanbul as an alternative location. There are also reports of pressure from the U.S. and Europe for some kind of settlement.
And President Trump was invited.
Zelensky suggested Trump's presence might encourage Putin to show up. But Trump's participation is unconfirmed, apparently because he has a concurrent trip to the Middle East planned.
What if Putin doesn't show? Zelensky issued a warning.
Yes, he said if Putin fails to attend, it proves Russia isn't willing to end the war. And in that case, he called for more severe international sanctions. The Kremlin's response so far, via spokesman Dmitry Peskov, has been pretty non-committal.
Russia had previously said they'd send a delegation to Istanbul, though. What are military analysts saying? Are talks likely, or is more fighting expected?
Well, analysts like ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, indicate both sides are actually preparing for spring-summer military campaigns. Russia's reportedly replenishing frontline units. While Ukraine just had the smallest Russian drone attack of the year, the overall assessment suggests continued military focus, making near-term peace talks seem uncertain.
And finally, our last story today concerns Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stating unequivocally, no end to the war until Hamas is defeated.
Right. A very clear statement. And it really complicates any ceasefire talks.
Yeah.
Even after Hamas released the last living American hostage, Eden Alexander, which was seen by some as a gesture towards President Trump.
Hamas still has its conditions for releasing the remaining hostages, right? The same ones that have blocked deals before.
Pretty much. A lasting ceasefire, more Palestinian prisoner releases, and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Those have been the sticking points for over a year. Israel reports 58 hostages still held, but they believe up to 23 might no longer be alive.
This strong stance from Netanyahu could create more distance between Israel and the Trump administration. The U.S. hoped Alexander's release might lead to an end to the conflict.
That's the potential rift, yes. The briefing suggests Alexander's release was negotiated mainly between Hamas and the Trump administration, kind of bypassing Israel with no Israeli concessions involved. Netanyahu's focus on the total destruction of Hamas as a long-term goal might diverge significantly from U.S. desires for a quicker de-escalation of this 19-month conflict.
And Netanyahu is signaling an imminent escalation in Gaza.
He is. He said Israeli forces are just days away from a promised escalation, moving with great strength to complete the mission. He also stressed any ceasefire would only be temporary. This comes after Israel broke an 8-week ceasefire back in March, launching intense strikes, causing hundreds of casualties, and worsening the humanitarian crisis by blocking imports, leading to those famine warnings.
So quite a range of stories today, from intricate Middle East diplomacy and strategic military moves in Europe and the Pacific,
to major domestic policy battles over taxes and spending, immigration shifts, campus unrest, even law enforcement tech, and government operational challenges. It's a lot.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is, doesn't it? Global events, domestic policy, technology, it all weaves together. We hope this deep dive gave you, our listener, a shortcut to understanding these key developments.
And maybe highlighted some of those connections you wouldn't normally see just following single news stories. It really shows the complexity, the ripple effects of decisions made in one area on others.
Definitely something to think about, how all these different forces, from geopolitical strategy to domestic budget fights, are shaping the world you navigate every day.
Constantly shifting, constantly interacting. It encourages you to keep asking questions, looking beyond the headlines.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking understanding.